Okay, 8th graders, we are on your very last section of our linear equation, linear function unit. So it's pretty exciting. Real quick, I asked you guys to do this exploration first, and I just kind of wanted to talk about it. So I hope that you guys did this. I wanted you to graph these 6 lines and make some observations. So what number did I change? Well, I didn't change the slope, but I changed the y-intercept, which affected our graph, obviously. When you look at the different lines, because we changed the y-intercept, what this caused it to do was just to slide up and down on our y-axis, okay? The slope stayed exactly the same. It didn't get steeper, less steep, but it did shift, and that's what we're going to start talking about today is transforming these linear equations and making them look different just by changing some values. On the back side of that sheet, I had you guys do this one, and I wanted you to do it in 2 different colors so you could see the different graphs. So again, what number did we change? Well, we didn't change the y-intercept because they all go through the origin. They all went through 0. Some of you might have had trouble graphing this, but remember that there is a 1 in front of the x, and then this is a plus 0. So all of these are plus 0, okay? So anyways, we graph this, and you notice that they shift, okay? They rotate a little bit. So if you were thinking about a clock, you know, these would get more steep here. And then the other thing that I want to point out is that if you look at my pink and my blue line, they're exactly the same steepness. They're just a reflection of each other. So I've started kind of using some of these terms that we're going to talk about. So I talked about reflection and rotation, and then translation is the one on the front side. Normally we will have defined these vocabulary terms, but just in our setting right now, we're not focusing a lot on it. But we're going to put a little note up at the top here so that you guys can reference it. Sometimes it's hard to remember everything that was said during a little lesson. So the 3 different types of transformations are translations, we have rotations, and we have reflections. Okay, so a couple of things that we're going to note here is that a translation, and it's really close to transformation, is like a slide. So I'm going to put that, like a slide, or shift. Those are some terms kind of used to describe a translation. A rotation is always about a point. And you want to think of this like a turn. I'm going to put like a turn. And I also think of a clock, because we have the hands on the clock that rotate. And then a reflection, you can think of this as a flip, and think of this as a mirror. Those are some things that help me think about when I think about reflections and what I'm going to expect from these changes. Okay, so I give you a couple graphs for each one. We're going to graph A on this one and B on this one, and then we're going to describe the transformation. And the reason why they use f of x and g of x is just so you know which one is which. It's the same thing as y, but in this case, we are using f of x and g of x so you can tell the 2 graphs apart when we talk about them. Okay, so my first graph is just this parent function, which it starts at 0, and it has a slope of 1, and then we're going to graph our line. It's hard when I get to the end of this booklet. Okay, and then my other line, I'm just going to do it in a different color for us. I have the same slope, but it starts down here at -5 and has a slope of 1. So I'm going to graph that line. And I'm also going to throw some labels on here. So this was my f of x, and this is my g of x. So they say describe the transformation from f of x to g of x. So what happened from the blue line to the green line? Give you guys a second to think there. Did it rotate? Did it shift? Did it reflect? What I noticed that it did is that the slope didn't change. It slid straight down, maintaining the exact same angle. So this is called a translation. So we're going to say translation, and then you have to describe it. Okay, that we know that that means that it shifted and it went down. How many units? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 5 units. And that's your answer. Your graph, and then this. Okay, so let's do the next one. My f of x, it starts at +4, and it has a slope of 1. It looks like it's right there. And then I'm going to do my other one. It starts at -2 and has a slope of 1, same slope. And you guys are going to get good to where you don't even need to really graph them to know what's happening. Maybe some of you guys are picking up on that already. So the first one is my f of x. Second one is g of x. Well, what happened from one to the other was at +4, and it shifted down. Well, how many units? I always use my intercept, my y-axis to count. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 units. So it was also a translation. Down 6 units. Now they're not always going to go down. That was just the 2 examples that I had picked out for us here. Okay, so now we're going to talk about rotating. And I just want to highlight here, what changed in these equations? This one was +0. So just note that this changed. It was the y-intercept, and it was on that one too. Okay, so the y-intercept changes on those. Now we're going to do a rotation. The first graph starts at +2, and it has a slope of 1. Remember, there's nothing there, there's just a 1. Okay. And then this one I'm going to title f of x. Then I'm going to graph my second one. It actually starts at the same point, but the slope is 2/1, so I go up 2/1, up 2/1, up 2/1. Graph my line. And that is g of x. So it says describe the transformation. Well, we know that it didn't move up or down, but one thing that I notice is that it rotated. It spun. And we're going to describe this rotation. I'm going to say it was a rotation. When you describe a rotation, you have to tell me which point it rotated about. So it rotated about, and then this coordinates, 0, 2. Okay, maybe I'll just draw a little arrow here. Okay, and then did it get more steep or less steep? Well, from blue to green, it became steeper. So it was a rotation about this point, and it became steeper. Okay, let's check out another one of these ones. So I'm going to graph the first equation. Now that starts at -1, My second equation is 3 over 1, so up 3. 1, 2, 3 over 1. 1, 2, 3 over 1. Plot or graph my line. So this equation is f of x. And then my other equation, I am going to start at -1, but my slope is 1/2. So up 1 over 2, up 1 over 2. And I'm going to draw my line. And this is my g of x. So it says, what is the transformation? Well, again, it did not shift at all, but from my blue line to my green line, it definitely rotated. So I'm going to describe this as a rotation. Remember, you have to tell me which point. So this point is about 0, 1, -1, sorry. Notice that's my y-intercept. And then did it get more steep or less steep? It became less steep. And that's what you have to write. Okay, so notice our slopes. This is a slope of 3, this is a slope of 1/2. If your slope changes, it's going to be some sort of rotation, and if it gets smaller, then it's going to get less steep. If it gets bigger, if it went from 1/2 to 3, it would get more steep. Okay, so the next type is called a reflection. So this is that mirrored image, and it says on E, we're going to do E on this graph and F on this graph. It says graph f of x equals x. Now this, just remember, this is a 1x plus 0. So my graph is going to start here. This is we call it our parent function. It's the simplest linear equation. Okay, and then it says reflect it and across the y-axis and graph g of x. So this is f of x. So in a reflection, it crosses the y-intercept at the same place. The points, it just kind of mirrors each other. So that was 1 point over. This is 2 points over. The other way to think about it is that the slope is just the opposite. So it was, instead of being a +1 for a slope, it has a slope of a -1. So they want you to graph it and then write the function. So this is g of x. Well, the function of g of x, like I said, the intercept's still the same, but my slope is a -1 instead of a +1. Okay, we'll try that one more time with this other graph. So this one I have, it starts at -1. My slope is a -4. So 1, 2, 3, 4 over 1. 1, 2, 3, 4 over 1. And then graph your line. And you want to mirror this to the other side. So it's going to cross at the same place, but it's going to be on this side. Same thing over here. Like I said, you guys are going to get to the point where you don't need to graph these to know what the equation, what's going to happen to the function, the actual equation. So our g of x equation, the intercept is still the same. It's still at -1, but it has a positive up 4 over 1 slope. So it's 4x plus 1. That describes it. So with a reflection, they more so just want you to graph it and then be able to write the equation. Okay, so the last problem on here is that sometimes we have multiple transformations that happen at the same time. And you guys have to be able to pick those out and describe them. But it's not too tricky. So we're just going to graph these two lines. The first one is that parent function. Starts at 0, goes up by 1. And like I said, you guys are getting to the point where you're going to be able just to look at that graph, at that equation, and not need the graph to tell you what happened. So this is my f of x. Then I'm going to graph my g of x, which starts at positive 1. So already, do I have the same intercept? Nope. So we know that the graph is going to go up 1 unit, and then 1, 2, 3 over 1. 1, 2, 3 over 1. So I'm going to put my line on here. So two things happen. It moved up a unit, okay? So that's a translation. And it went up 1 unit, okay? The other thing that occurred, note that it became steeper, okay? So that is a rotation. And I know on our other ones, I wanted you to tell me which point it rotated about, but when you have multiple transformation, that's kind of difficult because did it rotate before it moved up or after it moved up? We don't know. So you just have to tell me that's a rotation and it became steeper. And that is all that you need to do for the multiple transformations. Okay, so your guys' last little homework assignment here for this unit. You have this worksheet, the front and back. I spilled coffee all over mine. And then you have an iExcel. So make sure you guys are reaching out to me if you guys have questions or comments. And I hope you guys are doing great.